And if something goes wrong, you learn from it. You make a mistake. That's how we learn. We learn from making mistakes. It's like a little child learning to walk. How many times do they fall down? They fall down hundreds of times before they learn to walk. But do they quit and go, no, I fell down, I'm not going to even try anymore? Nope, they just keep getting back up until they get it right. We're not built to be sickly and mentally and emotionally broken. We're built to thrive. It's the stories that we tell ourselves that cause us a lot of this stuff. And we continue to reinforce this story. Oh, I always get anxiety when this happens or that happens or when I want to do this or that, and so I just don't do it. Hello, my friends. How's everybody doing today? Today I want to just kind of talk off the cuff, but I have a couple of things on my mind, and so we'll just see where it goes. How's that sound? I do want to say thank you to those that follow me, and I appreciate your loyalty, and hopefully I'm offering you something of value, which I believe I am. Otherwise, you wouldn't continue to follow me and listen to my videos. I also want to say I am actively looking for people to interview on this channel. And so if you know somebody or or you want to be interviewed and tell your experiences with near-death experiences, with spiritual transformative experiences and so on, psychic phenomena, reincarnation. I'm actively looking for children's reincarnation stories from parents who've had children. And so far I haven't been able to, well, I've only had one person come on, but they weren't specifically for that. They just happened to have that experience. So, well, let's get started. Let's talk about fear. Most people will think, well, I'm not that fearful. However, we have all kinds of fears, and there's different sort of classifications of them, I guess you could say. So fear is not necessarily, you're scared to death that somebody's going to run you over or kill you or something like that. There's all kinds of different fears, and it all boils back to one thing, and I'll get to that in a little bit here. But so we have fear of not performing our job well, or we have fears of confrontation, and that's a big one. And so we often give ourselves away because we fear the confrontation that it might cause. That's a huge one in our society, and that was a huge one for me too, and it still is. But I'm getting better at it. And there's a way, because things come up and you go, well, if I say this or do this or I pose this, there's going to be a confrontation, especially if it's a family member or a loved one, because we all know that what triggers the other, unfortunately. And so oftentimes we'll give ourselves away because to avoid that confrontation. Whereas if you think about it more clearly, sometimes, and I'm not saying it's easy, it's not easy for me, you can think of a way to do it in a more less confrontational way. And sometimes it doesn't matter. The other person's going to be confrontational anyways if you oppose their whatever it is that you might oppose with them. And they're used to the confrontation also. And so the trigger, that's those triggers. That's one of the biggest fears, I think, in society. And it all connects back to some childhood memories, in my opinion. It's like this long chain of incidences connected to this one childhood memory where this fear rose up, and you didn't fully understand it, but the brain started connecting it to the mind, starts connecting it to other similar situations. They might not even be the same situation. And so this fear comes up and the programmed response. And so oftentimes you're responding the way a 5-year-old would in an adult situation, which is inappropriate. So something to think about. So if you have a memory that comes up, a childhood memory comes up when you're upset about something or you in a confrontation, that's usually probably where the memory or one close to it. And so we fear failing. Okay, we fear not being adequate in a lot of ways, especially in marriage and partnerships and business and so on and so forth. And so sometimes that limits us from doing things or prevents us from doing things. In fact, that's probably one of society's biggest holdups or holdbacks, individually and collectively, to moving forward, to making progress, is we let our fears control us. There's an old saying that I love that says, if you're not living your dreams, you're living your fears. And that's true. And when you look around and you think about it, unfortunately, that's a cultural norm. And so, and it takes courage to step out and try to live your dreams. And that doesn't always mean, you're looking to be wealthy or this or that, but just something that you've always wanted to do, but you were afraid to because there's this thing that in the way, or there's this thing that could go wrong, or what are people going to think? That's another one. We fear what people think. That's a huge societal, cultural thing. These kind of things. So fear is the mind killer. There's the old saying, and I believe it was, I'm not sure if it was Winston Churchill or maybe it was Winston Churchill or FDR during World War II, around the beginning. Anyways, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. You guys can look that up and correct me in the comments, depending on who said that. But it's either Winston Churchill or Franklin D. Roosevelt. One of the two. I don't recall which. So, and fear is the mind killer. It'll remove all those aspirations to do things because you start listing all the fears and all the reasons why, and you may not even recognize them as fears. It's just, oh, well, I can't do that because I don't have enough money, or I need to have this first and I need to have that first. And so, and then there's the other side of the coin is to just step out and have your intention to do that and don't even worry about how it's going to happen. And if you can do that and stay consistent with it, then the universe will come to your aid and start opening doors for you. Most all of us have experienced that, even if you don't recognize it. Have you ever decided you were going to do something and you really wanted to do it and you focused on it and you put a lot of attention on wanting to do that, and then opportunities arose and you took those opportunities? And it could be something small, that happened to you. Ponder on that and see what comes to mind, stuff that you've done. And everybody has done something to some degree or another. It doesn't have to be some big and great thing that gets all kinds of excitement and accolades, and goes viral on YouTube or any of that kind of stuff. So what is the biggest thing? The biggest thing, in my opinion, is it all boils back down to the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, okay? Some people will say, well, I don't fear death. And I say that too. I said, I really don't fear death. And consciously, I do not, because I've listened to enough near-death experiences and I've had my own spiritual experiences of the other side that I know that there's life after death, okay? And so I don't have an innate fear, at least consciously, but who knows? When you come to a point, there's the physical reaction of the body. And I recall a near-death experience that I read about where a person saw a previous life where they were burned at the stake. And during that life, they had vowed that they were not going to show any pain during that time. And they recalled actually leaving their body and watching the body scream in pain, even though they were already out of the body during that lifetime, during that death. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. So the body has these physical reactions sometimes that you can't control, especially if you're leaving the body at that point. So, and that's a pride thing too, as well. I'm not going to show my torturers any fear, Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? So everything, there will be a reckoning, so to speak, of everything. And that doesn't necessarily mean a punishment. The vast majority of near-death experiences say that there's no punishment, no judgment. It's just your own self judging your own actions and going, oh man, I screwed up here. I could have done better there, that kind of thing. And they all talk about this unconditional love that surrounded them. There was no judgment of anything they did. It was just experience. And that's one of the things that we're here doing, is experiencing what we're not. We're experiencing many of the opposites of who and what we are, so that we can have a deeper and purer understanding of who and what we are and appreciate it and so on. And you've heard me say that many times, and I can't emphasize it enough. And you've probably heard my analogy before too, about sitting in a nice warm house by the cozy fire, sipping your favorite beverage with a loved one. You can't fully appreciate that unless you've been out in the bitter cold. So I'm trying to shorten it because I've said it so many times, but I can't emphasize that enough. Maybe you can come up with your own analogy for that too. So fear, it perhaps is our biggest hindrance, but it's also a great teacher to overcome your fear. There's a saying also that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being in fear. And I can relate to that, and most of us can probably relate to that on some level. Like I can recall being on a job or going out to a job or something, and I had all kinds of apprehensions about being able to do the job or do it right or do it well enough and not knowing enough about it yet, that kind of thing. And all these fears, although I wouldn't have called them fears at that time, I would have said, oh, they're just apprehensions, that's normal, which it is, but it is a type of fear. And then getting to the job and going and getting through it and having a few challenges, but going, wow, this was nothing like I anticipated it. And so life is, and so I learned from that. And I learned now that, and I learned after that, and because that happened many times, that I didn't have to have that kind of apprehension. It's like, oh, I'll figure it out, And so that fear went away. And you can probably relate to that too on something that you've done. That seemed kind of scary because you hadn't done it before or didn't know that much about it, and you were learning as you went and so on. And there's hundreds of YouTube videos of people doing stuff like that too. And that's incentive to step out and just try it. And if something goes wrong, you learn from it. You make a mistake. That's how we learn. We learn from making mistakes. It's like a little child learning to walk. How many times did they fall down? They fall down hundreds of times before they learn to walk. But do they quit and go, no, I fell down, I'm not going to even try anymore? Nope, they just keep getting back up until they get it right. That's a lesson from little children, folks, for all of us. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. That's important. Don't let your fears run your life, okay? People say conquer your fears. And I think that's true to a large degree, depending on what you do. But there's some fears you may never conquer, but you'll overcome the fear ruling you, is one way to look at it. And so I think that's really important to do. But, there's people that are hardly afraid to walk out of the house because of different kinds of fears. And we have a lot of diagnosed, I guess you could say, anxiety, high anxiety that people have, and this is probably connected to some childhood incident that caused a fear. And so I would recommend contemplating, like when you have high anxiety and you don't want to leave the house or whatever it is, or you get into a situation and you're having a problem with this on a regular basis, is to sit down, take some deep breaths, try to meditate on it. And this will, of course, may help the anxiety subside, but see what memories pop up in your head from childhood and face them and try and give them some new perspective. You don't have to go to a therapist or do any of this kind of stuff. The body, science knows now that the body has an amazing capacity to heal, but so does the mind and the emotions. So we're not built to be sickly and mentally and emotionally broken. We're built to thrive. It's the stories that we tell ourselves that cause us a lot of this stuff. And we continue to reinforce this story. Oh, I always get anxiety when this happens or that happens or when I want to do this or that, and so I just don't do it. And you keep telling yourself that story over and over. Change the script. Try it. And it takes some time and practice, and I'm not saying it's easy, and everybody's different. And I'm not saying there's not times when you need help too, and to seek out help. Sometimes just talking to somebody about it can be helpful, but you don't always have to. You just have to change your mind. That sounds really simplified. Just change your mind, but it might take some regular practice to bring your thoughts to a different place when something like that happens. So overcome your fears, my friends, by facing them. There's another old saying that from sailors, I believe, is that when you see a storm coming, don't try to outrun it. The fastest way to get on the other side of it is through it. Because if you try to outrun it, it'll catch up to you and it'll be worse because, but if you turn and head straight into it, the ship will weather it better. That's an analogy for life, my friends. Whenever there's a storm, don't run from it. Turn and face it and head into it and deal with it. And you'll learn from it and you'll grow from it. That's how we grow. We grow from opposition. Okay, that's why there's opposition. The gym analogy. Everybody knows if you go to the gym, there's going to be pain and suffering there. But people regularly pay and sign up to go there on a regular basis. Why? Because they know they're going to get stronger if they stick it out, if they're consistent. Nobody goes to the gym and goes, oh, these weights are heavy and painful. I'm not going to do anything. Why go to the gym if you're not going to do that? So that's a good analogy for life too. And a lot of people won't set foot in a gym because they know there's pain and suffering there. But most of the people that do go there, they don't see the pain and suffering as a bad thing. They see it as a good thing that they can grow from. And that's a super way to look at life, is everything that comes to you, especially the things that we consider pain and suffering or bad or whatever, are opportunities to grow and be strengthened. If you look around at some of the most influential people who've done some of the greatest things, many of them have had very traumatic lives or went through a very traumatic experience that made them stronger to become that person that they are now to do the things that they're doing. So think about that. Think about somebody who's done some great things. And if you don't know about their life, maybe research their life and see what brought them to that point. I think also some people, they don't have any real traumatic experiences, but they become a very influential person, doing some really good things, great things, helping others. They may have had some traumatic things in past lives that they learned from, and the essence of which they brought into this life. So that's something to think about, my friends. So you might also say, hey, I don't fear death, just like I do most of the time. But most of your fears will relate back to that fear, I think, in my opinion. If you disagree, hit me up in the comments and let's talk about that. I'd be interested in hearing different perspectives on that, because I'm not saying I have it all figured out. That's just my opinion. Tell me what you think. Face your fears, face your challenges. You can call them challenges, we don't like to call them fears because that might make us look weak, which is another fear of, gee, how do we look? What do other people think about us? I think as you get older, naturally, you care less about what other people think of you, but it's still a cultural thing. And I still do it sometimes. I worry about what people might think about this or that. And so I try to temper my actions sometimes to that, which can be okay as long as you don't give yourself away in doing that. I mean, in a social setting, it's okay to temper some things that is going to may cause a disturbance. And some people have no filter there, and they cause disturbances wherever they go, and that's the other extreme. So don't be that person either. But you got to find that middle way, the Buddhist tenet of the middle way, the middle ground, the balance. There's dark and light. There's good and bad and everything. There's positive and negative. Brings up my battery analogy. You got to have a positive and a negative pole. All the magic happens between the two poles. You disconnect one, and you got nothing, no power. So it's the same with us. You've heard the saying, you got to take the good with the bad. That's true in a sense, but maybe not in the sense that a lot of people think. It's true that you learn from the bad and you grow from it. And it's a necessary thing sometimes to get you where you need to go, because you had to learn from some of those negative experiences. Think about that. Ponder that, my friends. I hope this may help somewhere in your life. I hope this finds the right people. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and have a great day wherever you're at. And peace out, my friends.